Hi BookTube, my name is Juan, I am just one reader, and today I will be answering a very fun, interesting tag. The authors I've read the most books by tag, which was originally created by Jeremy Fee, but the video that I saw that inspired me to make my own version of the tag was by A.J. Don Reads and Writes. His channel is new to me, but I've been recently enjoying his content for quite some time. He and I share some taste in books, and he's a very interesting person to watch. I think you will enjoy him. So, the authors I've read the most books by tag is a simple, straightforward enough tag. Basically, what you have to do is make a list of the authors that you have read the most books by and talk a little bit about the author, maybe what it is that you love about all of these different authors. Keep a tally and an account of how many books you have read by each author, sort of to make things interesting and rank the author. So that's what I've tried to do, and I think I've done a pretty successful job. I have come up with 10 authors, and they are in ranking, they are ranked in order. My only problem was my number one, because my number one I know is my number one, but I couldn't tell you for the life of me how many books I have read by that author. But I do know that he's my number one for obvious reasons that you'll get to see in a few minutes. So what I will do is I will talk about each author and why I love that author. Maybe I will share some of my thoughts about my favorite book by each author, and that's what I will do. So coming in at number 10, I have a tie between Daphne du Maurier and Ende. I have read 4 books by each one of these authors, and the reasons why I love them, even though they are very different, is because of the way that they create atmosphere and a sense, a feeling of awe, of fascination, and of wonder, an atmosphere of wonder. My favorite book by Daphne du Maurier so far is The Birds and Other Stories. Wonderful, wonderful collection, and it's a clear example of why I love reading du Maurier, because of the writing style, the atmosphere, the seductive but ominous atmosphere charged with suspense that she always creates wonderfully well. And on the other side, we have Ende or Michael Ende. This is my favorite book of all time, The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende. Again, a perfect example of what I mean. This book is complete, unadulterated awe. Like, when I first read this book, and still to this day when I reread it, there's this feeling of wonderment when I go into it. The way that he builds these worlds, it's full of imagination and wisdom. It's a very profound book, but it's also just incredibly sort of whimsical. Coming in at number 9 is George Saunders. I have read 5 books by George Saunders, 3 short story collections, 1 children's book, and his novel, Lincoln in the Bardo. But my personal favorite by him is 10th of December, which was the first thing that I ever read by him. And this short story collection is the reason why I love George Saunders and why I love short story collections, period. This is one of my top 10 favorite books of all time, which might be controversial because many people do not get along with his writing style. But I think he is a masterclass in good writing. He is a minimalist, meaning that he only uses the language that he needs to use. There's no fat, there's nothing extra in his writing. It's just incredibly sharp language, very sparse, very specific. Like, he really knows how to put you in his world, in his scenarios that he comes up with. The reason why I love George Saunders, other than his writing style, is he is incredibly inventive and imaginative, and he uses devices from fantasy and science fiction and many other different kinds of genres, like historical fiction, like in Lincoln with the Bardo, and he uses ghosts and a Greek chorus, and he's not afraid of using different sort of devices from other genres and styles in order to get to the truth of his characters and of the really important conflicts that he addresses. So if you haven't read George Saunders, I might suggest picking this one up. The language can be a bit off-putting at first, but if you really get into it, you will fall in love. Coming in at number 8, C.S. Lewis, because he's the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. And even though I read the Chronicles of Narnia like 1,000 years ago when I was a child, and I've never reread them, I don't know if I ever will reread them, but I have technically read 7 books by this author, so I don't know what else to say. I mean, that's just it. I have read 7 books by C.S. Lewis. I don't exactly remember if there was anything memorable for me in terms of his writing style, but I do remember that these were 7 books that I read as a child with a lot of... I found them really charming and delightful and very addictive. I really loved some of the characters, especially the annoying, kind of unlikable characters. I really loved those, like Eustace and Edmund. I really loved them, this sort of underdog, kind of mean boys that you really care for when you really think about who they are. But other than that, I have no idea what else to say about C.S. Lewis. I don't know if I will ever reread the Chronicles of Narnia now that I am a very strong atheist. I don't know if I want to go back. Maybe I will. I don't know. Moving on. Before I move on, I forgot to say that I think from the 7 books in that series, my favorite one used to be The Magician's Nephew. I think that's book 6 or book 1, depending on the order in which you read them. That's all I have to say on C.S. Lewis. Coming in at number 7 is Neil Gaiman. I have read 8 books by Neil Gaiman, and he's an author that I feel sort of ambivalently towards, because even though he's an author that I really cherished when I was younger, I just don't feel inclined right now as an adult to read his books, but I probably will continue reading his work, especially the nonfiction books that he has released. Actually, I think I have one right here, of The View from the Cheap Seats, but I am open to reading more Neil Gaiman as an adult, even though I definitely vibed more with him when I was younger. But he's an author that I really treasure in my memory. The reasons why I love Neil Gaiman are, I think, the sort of weird, dark, exuberant, whimsical quality, which is something that you can see is an important factor in why I love the books that I read and the authors that I read many books from. The writing style, the whimsical quality of that, and the way that they create an atmosphere that is playful, slightly dark or very dark, but very atmospheric books. And that certainly is the case with Neil Gaiman. My favorite 2 Neil Gaiman books, I couldn't decide which one was better, or I think this one would be better objectively, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, but I also chose Neverwhere. Both of these are very different, and they represent, to me, different aspects of Neil Gaiman and why I love Neil Gaiman. This one represents more the whimsical quality that I was talking about, the playful, plot-heavy, adventurous side of Neil Gaiman, the whimsical and really imaginative way of playing with this idea of London, one of my favorite cities, London below and London above, and this whole dual reality situation. But The Ocean at the End of the Lane is more a serious kind of Neil Gaiman story, very driven by emotion and nostalgia, the ideas of memory and loss and childhood, and it's an incredible novel. So yeah, that's Neil Gaiman. Then coming in at number 6, I have Carlos Ruiz Zafón, my dear Spanish author who just passed away this last 2020. I have read 9 books by him, which are all of his works. I think it's 9 in total. And I feel like it's so much more than that. It has to be so much more than that. But then I realized it's because I've reread them many times. Even though he only published, I think, 9 books in total, I've read all of them at least twice. But this one, my favorite book by him, and probably my top 3, one of my top 3 favorite books of all time, The Shadow of the Wind, La Sombra del Viento. I have read this book maybe 10 times, and it just keeps getting better and better. If you don't like this book, you are not my friend anymore. Like, that's how obnoxious I can be regarding my wonderful Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I adore him. I adore this book in particular, but the whole universe that he builds around Barcelona and this family, the Sempere family, who own and run a bookshop, and the adventures that they live, and the other characters, Fermín Romero de Torres, the other characters that appear in this books. I just love everything that he has created. I think his writing style is absolutely gorgeous in the original Spanish. I've never read a translation of his work. I don't need to. I don't want to. The Spanish is so beautiful. The way that he centers so much in all of his books, but in this one in particular, on writing and reading, readers and authors. Oh, it's so wonderful. There's a sense of imagination, awe, fascination, all of the things that I've said previously to the 10th degree. Like, it's just wonderful. Coming in at number 5 is Lemony Snicket, because he wrote a series of unfortunate events, which, even though it's just one series, it's 13 books long. So I have read 13 books by him, plus another book that he wrote, which is not part of the series. Actually, Lemony Snicket is a pseudonym for Daniel Handler. That's his real name. And as Daniel Handler, he published another book, which I think the title is Why We Broke Up. And it's one of the worst books that I have ever read in my life. If you see that book, just run in the opposite direction. It sucks. But I do love A Series of Unfortunate Events. I've reread them many times. I loved those books dearly. I read them compulsively and with a passion when I was a child. My favorite ones in the series are probably the 5th and 6th entries, which are The Austere Academy. I love this book. And The Ersatz Elevator. I think this one might be my favorite one, just because of the whole fashion, like glamour, hubris. I just love that. These books are hilarious. What I love the most about Lemony Snicket's style is the way that he never thinks of children and his audience as a dumb kind of audience. He never plays it down. He never dumbs it down. He really goes there. He takes his audience quite seriously. He's incredibly truthful and honest, and he's not afraid, and he's mocking of himself. He's playful. Again, playful and whimsical writing, which is very important to me, of course, as you probably know by now. And these books are grim and dark and ominous, but they are hilarious. Coming in at number 4 is one of my idols, Philip Pullman. I have read 14 books by Philip Pullman. I have reread many of them many times, so it does feel like I've read even more by him. He's an author that I want to read more of. I actually have a book on nonfiction, Demon Voices, on stories and storytelling by him that I want to read sometime soon. He's just one of those authors that I can never grow tired of. My favorite thing that he has written is, of course, his masterpiece, his Dark Materials. You probably have heard of this or have read it yourself, probably. I've reread this many times. I have written papers about this and psychoanalysis, and I basically firmly believe that every single child in the 21st century on planet Earth should read his dark materials just so they can grow intelligent human beings and be free the way that I was freed by these books and by some other books, by books in general. But I do generally believe that there's something truthful, honest, and indestructible and fundamentally kind and true about these books. Other than his dark materials, I would really recommend the Sally Lockhart Quartet, which is a series of 4 Victorian thrillers, which are more like young adult, but you can read them even as an adult. I think they are very fun and they are filled with wonderful characters. They are very pro-feminism. They're just wonderful examinations on character and gender issues in Victorian London. Very, very fun books. Philip Pullman is one of those authors that to me represent, he represents everything that I like. Atmosphere, whimsical quality, playfulness in his writing and in his approach of storytelling. He's a great storyteller. Even if you don't love the things that he writes about, his storytelling chops are amazing. I think his writing style is incredibly pretty and British and luxurious and for all ages. His adult things, his young adult things, his books for children, everything is top quality in my opinion. Coming in at number 3 is my dearly beloved J.K. Rowling. I know it's not the most popular thing to say in 2021. It's not cool or politically correct to say that you love J.K. Rowling, but I will be true to myself, and I will say that I love J.K. Rowling. I always have, probably always will. You can disagree or agree with me or with her. That's not what we're discussing in this video in particular. I really like what she represents to me. J.K. Rowling to me is my favorite author. Just because of what she has given me personally. She's the one who single-handedly gave me the gift of reading and the gift of imagination. And so I have read every single thing that she's published. I will read pretty much everything that she comes up with. I think in total that is 16 books, counting a book that is a transcript of a speech that she gave, which is called Very Good Lives. I am counting the Robert Galbraith novels as well in here. So I think it's 16 in total. My favorite books by J.K. Rowling are in the Harry Potter series. I think my favorite 2 books in the series are The Goblet of Fire, which is book 4, and book 5, The Order of the Phoenix. I sometimes choose one over the other. Right now, it's this one, Order of the Phoenix. I think this is a perfect book for me. It's the longest one, and I think that's also why I love it so much, just because there's more Harry Potter here. This edition is 956 pages of absolute bliss for me. But when I was growing up, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire was my favorite book ever. This is my most reread book of all time. I have read this book over 30 times. Yes, at some point when I was like 15 or 16, I very clearly remember I would read this, finish it, and then just start over. And I would do that on a cycle. Like, I was completely obsessed. I would read this, like it was the only thing in my life. So there you go. And my other sort of J.K. Rowling underhyped gem, which I really believe is a wonderful book, although many people don't like it. They dismissed it. And of course, if they dismissed it when it came out, they are never gonna read it now. But I really liked it, and I thought it was wonderful in its very own specific way, and that is The Casual Vacancy. I think this is a great book. I really, really loved it, and I might actually read it again soon, just to sort of go back to it, because it was so long ago that I don't really remember what it was about. Coming in at number 2 is Stephen King. I have read a total of 18 Stephen King books, which is astonishing to me. I never thought I had read 18 books by Stephen King. It just sounds like a lot. But you know what? He's a very prolific writer. He's a writer who goes from one genre to the other. He writes very consistently. He comes up with a new book, or maybe 2 new books, or maybe more per year. And I have read him throughout my reading life quite consistently. I remember the first Stephen King book that I read was in 5th grade. I was 9 or 10, and I asked my parents that they would let me read The Shining, and they did. And I started reading The Shining, and then Misery, and the sort of Carrie, and Thinner. The Dead Zone was, I think, my second Stephen King novel. I really loved that. I read these books like 20 years ago, so I don't really remember that the plots or the contents of those stories, but I do remember the experience of reading Stephen King compulsively, and just very fun reading experiences of my youth. But I think my favorite one was, I don't know if it still is because I read it so long ago, but my favorite one always used to be Salem's Lot, which is a vampire story, very much driven by character and emotion. But I haven't really read it in like a good 15 years, so I don't really remember. I would have to go back and reread it. But I don't know if I want to reread a Stephen King book, because there's just so many unread Stephen King books on my shelves. I have like 50 books by Stephen King that I haven't read, that I don't know if I will go back to the old ones. I would just rather go ahead into the new ones. Actually, I have a book on my TBR at the moment, which is 11/22/63, which everybody raves about, so we'll see. So what I love about Stephen King is he's just fun. He's creative, he's imaginative. He's not the best writer. I mean, we all know that he's like the epitome, the perfect representation and the perfect example of commercial fiction. But I really like him, and there's nothing wrong with liking commercial fiction, or that kind of pulpy fiction. I've always enjoyed his writing. I've always enjoyed his imaginative stories, and I've always loved horror. I was a very creepy child. I would always ask my parents to let me watch horror movies and horror TV shows. I've always been very drawn to that sort of ominous side of the human existence. I just love it. And Stephen King, although I don't find his books really terrifying, I find them really sort of creepy and sick, which I love. So now we come to my number 1, and like I said at the beginning of this long video, my number 1 is clearly my number 1 because he's an author that I have read very consistently, and I have reread him very consistently throughout the years. And I think he's a complete genius, like in the actual meaning of a word, genius. I think he was a genius. He is still a genius, and I think he is just one of those figures, to me, that it's Freud. I have I have many pictures of Freud. I have a lot of Freud memorabilia. Let's just put it there. If you're not aware, hi, my name is Juan. I am a psychoanalyst and psychotherapist. I work in Mexico City. This is where I work, where I live and work. I am part of the Mexican Society for Psychoanalysis here in Mexico City, and Freud is my guy. I love Freud. He has many articles and books and case studies and wonderful gems of writing, some of which are incredibly literary. Like he actually won a literary award for one of his probably his most popular and best known work, which is The Interpretation of Dreams. If I had to choose a favorite piece of writing written by Freud, I think that would be impossible. I think of Freud's work and oeuvre as just one thing. Something that I love about Freud and his whole career in writing is that he was never afraid of realizing that he had made some mistakes, and he was going to correct them. So you can see that there are some contradictions in Freud's theories and in Freud's approach of the human condition and his way of working psychoanalytically, because he used to work with a set of hypotheses and then he would try to see if they were correct or not, and then he would go back and say another thing, and then he would correct himself in future books. So what I really love about Freud's actual writing is that you can see a working, dynamic mind at work. You can see him talking to himself and actually talking to the audience, because these are some of the papers that he would read at international conferences. And so it was almost like he was trying to convince people of what he was finding in his patients. And you can really get the feeling when you read Freud that he's really trying to work things out, both in himself, in his patients, and also trying to create a theory of the mind, which he sort of built the foundations for. Of course, now modern psychoanalysis, as the way that we see it today in the 21st century, is much bigger than Freud. What Freud was able to do was so commendable and so brave, because he really completely challenged the idea of the human condition that was held at that point in time. But what he was able to do in terms of theory was just laying the groundwork. But on top of Freud, we have built such a wonderful dynamic theory of the mind and of working with people. So that's why I love my Freud. I think he's a genius. He's just the definition of truth and of, the passion to find truth in oneself and in others. And, what he created, psychoanalysis, is what drives me in my life every single day. It's what I do. So, of course, he's my most read author. If you could say that he's an author, I will say that he's an author. Anyway, that's the tag. This video is probably like over 20 minutes long. Forgive me. I hope you're not completely bored by now. But even if you are, I hope you will do this tag, because I would love to see other people's answers. What are your most read or most widely read authors? I would love to know. Thanks for watching. I am Just One Reader, and I will see you on the next video.